all through hydrogen, as Philip was saying. These are the principal alternatives that we have.
They are.
And what we're doing is building a market, working with with producers, with manufacturers, with the whole sector, to ensure that just as we're doing that with the electric vehicle manufacturers, we drive the bills down.
Okay,
because what we can't have is a situation in which ordinary homeowners, ordinary people living in their own home, are suddenly faced with an unexpected and unreasonable cost to put in a ground source or air source heat pump.
How are we going to do it then, Prime Minister? I mean,
I'll tell you how.
The Climate Change Commission said, and I think it's on the path to net zero, we have to get all homes not using fossil fuel boilers by 2033. That's 25 million homes. Last year, there were 38,000 heat pumps put in homes, 38,000, and by 2033, all homes have got to have either a heat pump or a hydrogen boilers, which aren't currently yet available. Where is the plan to do that?
You're right, but what we're doing is working with the manufacturers and working with the market.
So it can be done. Can it be achieved?
To ensure that we have the heat pumps in sufficient quantity to bring the price down. At the moment, let's be frank, these things cost about 10 grand a pop. Okay, right. This is a lot of money. For ordinary people, we've got to make sure that when we embark on this program, that we have a solution that is affordable and that works for people, and we won't do it. We won't be imposing it until we've been able
is the 2033 target then one that's going to be delivered?
I think we can do it in a very rapid timescale, and that's what we are doing. But it takes a great deal of determination. It means working with the producers. It means driving down the cost. And it means, as I was saying to Philip about electric vehicles, it means setting the market and setting the parameters. And at the moment, the prices are too high.
Right. Can I just talk then about future planning? Because one organisation looking at planning is an organisation called Place Shapers. Now, they're an organisation, you probably won't further term, perhaps, I understand that, of middle-sized housing associations. They have about 1 million homes in their responsibility, 1 million homes. They've looked at what it would cost them, part of their business plan, to get to zero carbon homes by 2050. For 1 million homes, they calculated it was going to be £104 billion. Only one of them could do it without going bankrupt. So where is the financial plan to enable social housing providers who want to do the right thing to be able to plan ahead and do it?
I think in a way you're repeating what I've just said, which is that...
Where is the plan?
The plan is to work with the manufacturers of these...
Yeah, but where is the financial plan to enable housing associations to afford it?
And we'll be bringing forward a plan under carbon budget.
When's that?
Under carbon budget.
Can we have a date?
We will be bringing forward a plan before COP 26
before COP,
in
have a date
November this year. Before COP, you will be getting a plan on the decarbonisation of the domestic market in this country, Clyde. But what I'm saying to you, and I think people will be interested in this. This government is determined to keep bills low.
Absolutely.
And to make and that is a priority. Now, the only way to do that is to build the market in a very systematic way, to make sure that we have the technology and make sure that it's affordable. And there are some big bets that we may need to place. Some bets we may need to place on hydrogen, but also some bets on ground source and air source heat pumps. And that is what
we'll have a plan where government shows their financial support both for social housing and for owner occupiers who want to do the right thing as well.
Yes, and there are the models and the solutions may be very different across different types of housing, different housing stocks. You know all the arguments.
Can we move on?
But you'll see it long before COP26.
Good. We look forward to it. Moving on to Caroline Noakes.
Thanks, Bernard. Are you hoping for any gender-specific outcomes from COP26? And if so, how will they be measured?
Thanks very much, Caroline. I think that the COP26 programme is one that will be of immense benefit to all of humanity. But I believe that in helping to tackle climate change, and it will help to tackle economic inequality, and I think that it will inevitably be of massive benefit to those who have tended to suffer the most, women in particular, who don't get, when it comes to their education, for instance, Caroline, don't get, in my view, as much investment as they need. And one of the things that we did at the G7 was to ensure that we put another $2.5 billion into the Global Partnership for Education, the bulk of which is to be spent on female education around the world. That's something I've campaigned on for a very long time, and I think that everybody coming to COP26 will understand that there's a clear link between economic progress, sorting out climate change, addressing climate change, and empowering and advancing women, and ending the injustice that so many young girls around the world receive far less investment in their education than young boys of the same age.
Will the cuts to UK aid help those girls, Prime Minister?
The UK is actually investing more, putting more money into education, female education. I think we're putting £453 million into the Global Partnership for Education, and Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya is coming to London in just a few days' time to help us raise even more.
Thank you.
Moving on, Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Prime Minister, at the G7, you didn't manage to get any of our 6 closest allies to pledge to abandon coal use. How do you think you're going to manage to get China to do something similar in Glasgow?
China is a huge global economy, the fastest growing emitter, and we have to address that problem. And I think that
now, how are you going to get them to agree?
By engagement. And I think that what you can't do is simply push China away, say that we must have nothing to do with China. China is a member of the P5. China sits on the UN Security Council, quite rightly. We've got to engage with China and make the case to China. And I think one of the most important things to come out of the G7 was the idea of the Build Back Better World, or the Clean Green Initiative. And that is a way.
I'm going to go to my questions, Prime Minister, rather than your answers, if you'll forgive me for a second. You're stretching
more interested in your questions than my answers.
No, I'm interested in your
answers. What is your prerogative, Mr. Tugendhat?
I'm interested in your answers to my questions, not to the questions you'd wished I'd asked. You did say in the General Assembly in 2019 that digital authoritarianism is not, alas, the stuff of dystopian fantasy, but of an emerging reality. How is that compatible with your recent decision, or rather your government's recent decision, not to call in Newport Wafer Fab for investigation?
This is a very difficult business, and this relates to people should know this relates to a chip manufacturer in Wales. We're looking into it. I've asked the National Security Advisor to review.
So it is being reviewed now.
We will look at it again. But don't forget that the
Business Secretary told me it was a matter to the Welsh Government. Thanks
to they rather sweetly asked us to deal with it. But what I can tell you, Tom, is that thanks to this government and our prudence in passing the National Security and Investment Bill, which I'm sure you voted for,
I did.
Good. We are able to take action.
Well, I'm delighted. It's a very important bill that you passed there, and therefore, if it's not used at a time...
I want to stress, and on this issue, and there will be others. Don't forget, this is the government. When I came in, we took the very difficult and painful step, and Greg will know all about this because you were, I think, Business Secretary, you had to deal with this. We took the very difficult and painful step of having to extricate this country from the Huawei.
I remember it was a very successful rebellion.
So this government is spending a huge quantity of taxpayers' money to make sure that we get Huawei out of our telecommunications networks, or out of the critical...
Prime Minister, you're going over history. May I move on?
But I want to make a very, very important point, because I do not want us, and I do not want anti-China spirit to lead to us trying to pitchfork away, Sir Bernard, every investment from China into this country. I have to say,
Prime Minister, there is a difference. Prime Minister, if I may, there is a difference between investment, which is looking for a normal return, to the purchase of technology. And what we're seeing here from Nexperia, which, as you know, is a company that is mostly owned actually by a Chinese state-backed firm, we're seeing a Chinese state-backed entity buying a semiconductor manufacturer at a time of global shortage, when Beijing is already looking for to stockpile semiconductors. Now, if China thinks this is a matter of their national security and essential to their sovereignty, if Italy, if Brussels, if the United States, if other countries agree and other entities agree, why don't you?
I think semiconductors are of huge importance to this country. And one of the things that I wanted to look at immediately as I became Prime Minister was whether or not we could become more self-reliant. And I'm told it costs about £9 billion for us to build a proper semiconductor factory. It's a lot of money, particularly during a pandemic, where we're thinking about what to do. There is this company. They make a lot of semiconductors in Ireland, as you know, but there is this company in Newport. We have to judge whether the stuff that they are making is of real intellectual property value and interest to China, whether the real security implications. I've asked the National Security Advisor to look at it.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and I'm delighted you did, because your decision on 0.7 to 0.5 must have been a very difficult decision for you, as you committed so publicly and clearly and frequently to 0.7 yourself, and I remember as Foreign Secretary you did as well. We're seeing a cut in the budget going to global tropical medicine and global vaccines at a time when we now know the interconnectedness of all our health globally. It's going from £150 million to £17 million at a time when we're seeing variants coming in from all over the world, and are likely to see more variants in the near future.
Sorry to rush you.
Will you be making sure that there is a vote in Parliament on this issue, and will you be looking to reverse such cuts which undermine the national security of this country as quickly as possible? Well,
again, Tom, I'm going to disagree with you in your characterisation of what this government is doing, because actually, you talk about vaccines. We put 1.5 billion of UK taxpayers' money into supporting supporting COVAX, and I think a further 450 or so into,
and that's brilliant,
into
this
Gavi.
Is separate.
And I just remind people watching this that of the 1.5 billion vaccines that the world has so far, that the developed nations have so far distributed around the world, roughly a third are as a result of the efforts of the UK government, the deal we did with Oxford, so that those vaccines are distributed at cost. That's the direct result of UK government action. I think people should be very, very proud of that.
I agree. We should be extremely proud of that.
We're talking about very, very big sums of money in a pandemic when we've had to spend £407 billion looking after the jobs, livelihoods, well-being, welfare of families in this country as well.
I think you should be rightly proud of the vaccines technology.
Thank you, Mr. Duganhart. Very grateful to you. Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, you've talked a good talk about the ambitions you've got for net zero, but 37 billion of revenue a year is solely dependent on the consumption of fossil fuel or greenhouse gas emissions. 37 billion, same price as test and trace, just for ease, and 28 billion is fuel duty alone. So how can you give the British public an idea of how you're going to fill that gap in revenue as we go greener?
Sorry, 37 billion of revenue from fuel duty.
No, 28 billion from fuel duty, 37 billion which is dependent on other consumption.
Well, Meg, I mean, you're making an incredibly a good point. You're talking about our the fiscal impact of moving to green technology and the implications of that as you phase out hydrocarbon vehicles, you phase out internal combustion engine vehicles, and you phase out.
So we know why, but I think the public would be interested to know what your thoughts are about how we go forward.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify it for everybody. There is down the line, of course, the Exchequer will start to see a loss of revenue. What I don't want to do, and let it be said now, and I saw some misreporting about this. What I don't, or some misunderstandings, I should say, I don't want to see fuel bills go up to compensate, if you see what I mean, Meg. So that is not the way forward.
So that's off the table. Is there anything on the table to fill the gap?
That's a matter for. I would not presume to anticipate the fiscal options of the Chancellor at a budget or any other fiscal event, as you know, mate.
Well, there's something to be said for encouraging the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a major statement about how we're going to plan public expenditure and taxation over the next decade.
I don't think you could fault the Chancellor for making major statements in the last.
But you would encourage him to do that.
Few months. I think he's.
You would encourage him to do that.
I think you will find that he has a lot to say in due course.
Very good. We're now going to move on to COVID secondary impacts and the COVID pandemic. So can I start with Greg Clark?
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I'd like to ask you about some of the lessons that can be learned so far in responding to the pandemic. But before I do, can I just ask a couple of quick questions of current concern? And the first is, why shouldn't double vaccinated Brits be able to go on holiday to Spain this summer?
Thanks, Greg. Look, I think that double vaccination is a potential and it's a great liberator. In principle, in practice, I think it's going to be great. And it already is. You can see the benefits. Two vaccines, whether of Pfizer or AstraZeneca or a cocktail.
Why can't people go to Spain?
They offer a lot of protection. And so what you will find is if you can contain your impatience just a little bit, is that the Secretary of State for Transport may be saying more about that in the course of the next few days, perhaps even tomorrow.
We hear that he is,
tomorrow. And I would not want to steal his thunder.
We know from the press that it's going to be about quarantine, but what I'm interested in is your instinct on the guidance for amber list countries, which states you should not travel to amber list countries. Is your instinct to get rid of it?
I think you should. I really don't want to anticipate or to steal the thunder of the Secretary of State for Transport. But what I can say, I can repeat what I've said already. I think that double vaccination offers massive potential.
Do you recognise the very together the guidance and the requirements? They should
yes,
be locked.
Of course.
Okay,
that's fine. And so you'll see a lot more on that.
Very
I think that the crucial thing is to remember that currently we need to contain the pandemic. We need to.
Well, let's come on to that. So I've got one question on that before we go on to other
that double vaccination is clearly the way forward.
So the 16th of August, when contacts of people with COVID no longer have to isolate, is the 16th of August, is that the date that you expect us to reach herd immunity in this country?
That's not the consideration.
So what's the significance of the 16th of August?
It's the time by which we feel that there will have been much more progress made in vaccination.
More than the 19th of July?
Even more than the 19th of July. And all these decisions are a balance of risk. And by the 16th of August, we will have got many more jabs into people's arms.
Many more young and healthy people.
Many more people
vaccinated.
Yeah, which is a good thing because it means.
But they are the most robust against COVID that we're waiting for.
Sure, and I'm sorry that they've had to wait. I know how frustrating.
I'm concerned about the consequences of that rather than the wait. Is it the case that until we get to that point on the 16th of August, people who have been jabbed twice will have to isolate even if they've had a negative COVID test?
We're asking people to isolate. I know how frustrating it is. But
why?
Because we have to. I'm afraid this is a highly contagious disease, and we have to do what we can to stop its spread. And that's the judgment we
estimate of how many contacts will have to isolate during that extra 28 days after the 19th?
Well, clearly that will depend on the spread of the.
Indeed, but have you seen an estimate?
I haven't seen any data on that, and obviously it will depend on the numbers.
So the Health Secretary has said that there could be around 100,000 infections a day, and if each of those has 2 contacts each, That's 200,000 a day. So over the course of that 28 days, the extra days that have been imposed, that's over 5 million people. Is that a reasonable step? And have you considered how many hospital admissions that is going to prevent?
We've been looking at all the data and trying to strike the right balance. And
so what are the two sides?
Well, the two sides of it are that you could simply say we're going to dispense altogether with self-isolation and move straight to a testing regime and not bother with asking people to do that anymore. The difficulty with that is that you would be effectively allowing many more people to be vectors of disease than by continuing with our plans.
But do you have an estimate of how many fewer hospital admissions would result from that?
I can't give you that number. But what I can certainly say is that we believe that the programme of test, trace and isolate has actually made a massive difference to the disease.
You know, and I know that you respect Sir John Bell, the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, and he, in evidence to my committee, said at the very least you should be able to be tested and released from COVID rather than to have to isolate for that period. And what he said was that actually it's more likely that people will comply with the guidance if there's a way out of it if they test negative. Will you consider at least taking Sir John's very expert advice?
We're moving to testing. That's rather than isolation.
Before the 16th of August.
That's the date where obviously we keep all data under review. We'll always be open to looking at the data, but that's we think the sensible approach. We want to retain the tool of asking people to protect others from the disease. It's been effective. It's an important
thing to do.
No matter how
many people,
I think we should stick with it.
It affects, and no matter what the result. Let me ask you one last question. Obviously, we're going to have the public inquiry that will look back when it's all over. But it is important to learn lessons on the way, and the Science and Technology Committee and the Health and Social Care Committees are conducting an inquiry into that. What would you do differently, given experience, and what would you do the same?
That's a very big question.
Give us an
Greg,
example.
But I think what I could. I mean, if you ask me what things have we started to do differently, and where have we really adapted since?
How have you learned from the experience during the way?
I think that is a really good question. And since the beginning of the pandemic, what have we learned that's obvious? I think that to begin with, it was clear that we didn't have all the data that we needed, and we certainly didn't have it all in one place or all in the right place. Every morning now, I go straight into a meeting where I can see pretty much what's happening in any hospital in the country. I can see the breakdown by age, by variant type. I can see exactly what's happening in pretty much real time. So we've set up the UK Health Security Agency. We brought that. So data we didn't have, and now we have. I think that diagnostics was an obvious thing. We didn't even know how to make a lateral flow test when we began. We didn't have the technology. In this country, we now do. We now have a diagnostics industry that's growing. PPE, we remember how difficult and how traumatic that was.
So these are lessons learned on the way.
We now have the ability to make 80% of our PPE in this country. To say nothing of vaccine technology, which is obviously developed massively. I think the single most important thing. I mean, and I know how much, Greg, you care about this, and I think you're right. The single most important thing that we've learned, or certainly that I've learned, is the massive benefits to our country, to our society, to our economy of investing in science. And there is, you could not have a clearer object lesson than the discovery of the Oxford vaccine, and the impact that is now having on our ability to open up our society in a way that otherwise, frankly, we couldn't.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We're running over time badly, but we will press on as quickly as possible. Mr. Timms.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
Last October, the Working and Pension Selection, on a unanimous cross-party basis, recommended that the £20 a week universal credit uplift should be made permanent. And last weekend, all 6 of the Conservative former Secretaries of State for Work and Pension since 2010 made the same call. How do you respond to that call?
I understand very much why people want to continue to invest in and to support the poorest and neediest in this society, and that's what we're going to do. And we will continue with an increase in pay for the lowest paid workers, which we've done. We've increased the national living wage. We've given councils huge sums to help those in greatest need. I think 4 million families have been helped to pay their council tax bills. You refer to the universal credit uplift amongst many other things that we have done, and they're huge, and they're part of the 407 billion. But I want to stress that as we come towards the inflection point in this pandemic, when we start to lift the non-pharmaceutical interventions, we start to lift the restraints on society, start to lift the government-imposed diktat that told people they couldn't go to work. Remember what we were saying. As we lift that, as we move beyond that, we have to have a different emphasis. And the emphasis has got to be on getting people into work and getting people into jobs.
But do you think
that's what we're doing?
Ian Douglas-Smith, Esther McVeigh, do you think they don't understand that
I have huge respect and admiration for all those people, and I understand where they're coming from. But the emphasis that this government is placing is on coming out of the pandemic with a strong jobs-led recovery.
If the cut goes ahead in 3 months' time, unemployment support will be at its lowest level in real terms for over 30 years, just as the end of the furlough scheme increases unemployment. According to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, 500,000 people would be pushed below the poverty line by taking the £20 away, including 200,000 children. And the universal credit allowance for under 25s have obviously been hard hit by job losses in the pandemic. That'll be cut by a quarter. Can all that damage really be justified?
But I think that the answer to that, and I understand what you're saying, but the answer is to get people into work. And if you look at what's actually happening since just in the last few months, you've seen that unemployment projections for unemployment, which you rightly worry about, but they're 2 million fewer than we were told there were going to be. We have lower unemployment than virtually all of the rest of the G7. Vacancy rates are up at pre-crisis levels, and the number of people on the payroll has now been rising for 5 consecutive months. It's true, there are now 2 million people still on furlough, and you're right to draw attention to that, and that's a very considerable concern. But if you look at but Mr. Timms, if you look at what's actually happening in the jobs market. If you look at what's happening in the jobs market, the problem at the moment, as I think most colleagues would testify, is a shortage of labour, not a shortage of jobs.
But do you accept that taking the £20 a week away will cause a lot of the hardship to a large number of people?
I think that the best way forward is to get people into higher wage, higher skilled jobs. And that's the ambition of this government. And we think, and if you ask me to make a choice between more welfare or better, higher paid jobs, I'm going to go for better, higher paid jobs.
Well, that's always been the view of Ian Douglas-Smith, of course, but he's calling for the £20 a week to be retained. Will you review this policy between now and September?
Of course, we keep everything under constant review, but I've given you a pretty clear steer about what my instincts are. And we're also, by the way, developing and pushing forward a lot of really excellent schemes for getting people into work. So not just Kickstart, but Restart and JETS, the job entry training scheme, to help people into work. I think that should be our mission. That should be our crusade.
Can I raise a different point with you? In February, you made the point to me in the Chamber, rightly, I think, that the government is worried about the increase in online fraud. The Work and Pensions Committee, the Treasury Committee, the Governor of the Bank of England, Financial Conduct Authority, City of London Police have all called for the online safety bill, which is being published now, to tackle scams. Why is the government unwilling to make that change to that bill?
I'm not aware that we're failing to do that, but I will. I'm very concerned that we should tackle fraud, and indeed I'm told that the online safety bill does just that. And companies
it does it for a very small part of the problem, which is user-generated content. It doesn't do it for online advertising, and that seems to be on a much longer-term track. And it's causing huge problems. So I wonder whether you could just have a look at the current online safety bill and see whether it could be changed to tackle online fraud.
I'm told that the bill will tackle a wide range of content and takes a focused approach to tackling online fraud. If you feel that it's in some way inadequate, I'm more than happy to look at it. But I know that one of the key objectives of the online safety bill is to tackle online fraud.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. Robert Halfon, Education.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. We've got Argentinian levels of hyperinflation in our schools, with 640,000 pupils being sent home this week compared to 385,000 the week or so before. The Centre for Social Justice have identified 93,500 ghost children who, for the most part, have not even returned to school since they were fully opened on March the 8th. We've also got exam orphans with Year 10 pupils due to sit GCSEs next summer, missing 1 in 4 days of face-to-face teaching. Of course, the £3 billion catch-up programme is hugely welcome, but what is your long-term plan to address endemic pupil absence, those pupils who've not even been back to school, and establish a level playing field so that all students have a fair crack of the whip doing exams next year?
Thanks, Robert. And I know how much you care about this and how vociferously, vehemently you campaign on this issue. And you're right. And what's happened over the last 18 months has been, for many children, really debilitating. And there's no question that they've lost unconscionable amounts of teaching and learning time. And we must remediate that. We must make it better. It's probably the single most important investment that we can make. So in addition to the 14 billion that we're putting into education that we began with as this government, we have a catch-up plan for a £3 billion catch-up plan so far, and before we come to anything that the Chancellor may do later on this year. And what that focuses on, you ask how we're going to do it. I think the thing that works, and the thing that I found that parents and teachers and pupils respond to, is more direct one-to-one, one-to-two tuition, and actually focusing on the needs of the individual child, and drawing out where they're going wrong, and really trying to focus on that. So we've got a massive program of that.
I completely am with you on that. I support the catch-up plan. 3 billion is a significant sum of money, but we know that the catch-up programme thus far is just reaching 44% of pupils on free school meals. Surely it should be focused on the most disadvantaged, and it doesn't address the endemic absence, the 93,500 children who are barely not in school virtually for most of the time, as I said, the Centre for Social Justice have identified. So why not redirect the way the catch-up programme is running, and also expand the Troubled Families programme to try and get these children back into school?
Rob, I think the best look. I know how unbelievably frustrating it is for parents and for pupils at the moment, because of the numbers that are out of school, because of the isolation policy that Greg and I were talking about just now, and the bubbles being sent home. And I understand why schools have been taking the actions that they have. They want to stop the spread of COVID, and they're quite right. And I fully support them. But the best thing is to move, as I think the Secretary of State for Education said yesterday, from bubbling to testing as the answer. And as I was saying to Greg, that is one thing that will help us to keep more kids in school. There are plenty of other children who are losing school time for other reasons, as I think you're hinting. We need to deal with that in a very, very determined way, and we need to. There will be more that I want to do on time in school, and making sure that we invest in the school timetable as well.
So just finally, Chair, so just to be clear that you will have a focus on the close to 100,000 kids, I call them the ghost children, and haven't even been back in school since even when they fully reopened in March. But do you not think there should be a long-term plan for education, which a significant part of it would require a longer school day, not just for academic catch-up, but for extracurricular activities such as sport and well-being? And what more needs to be done to convince you as Prime Minister and the Treasury that a fully funded long-term plan with a longer school day is worth supporting and giving proper resources to?
We're looking at the evidence, and if I'm absolutely frank with you and the committee, to begin with, some of the evidence that was assembled was not as good as it could have been. The evidence on timetable, the evidence on lengthening the school day wasn't as powerful as it was on tuition, for instance. But that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. I do think it's the right thing to do. The question is how you do it. What sort of activities? Is it enrichment? Is it academic? What's the mixture? As you rightly say, we're doing a proper review of all of that to get the evidence that we want. But in the meantime, over the summer, there's, as you know, all the summer schools, the Holiday Activities Fund, a big effort to try to help kids to catch up before September as well.
Just will you look at the Troubled Families programme to try and grab these students back into school, the close to 100,000 who've not been in school at all? Or other means to try and get these kids back into school, because they're not going to be helped by the catch-up fund as it is.
No, I understand.
As it's currently running.
No, look, you're making a very good point, and you know, it's you get into a risk of a circular problem. You keep missing the same group. So I will certainly look at what we can do.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Prime Minister, could we just spare a thought for the teachers, because the health service gets all the limelight in this pandemic, but the teachers have taken a hell of a burden in this.
They have. The teachers have, Sir Bernard, you're completely right.
And the support staff. Don't forget the support staff.
And they've done an incredible job. And what's so interesting, when you go to some schools, you can see the challenge that they have, because some children really are incredibly resilient and have just bounced through it without any problems at all. But that's not the case by any means for every child in this country, and it's had a big impact on.
Could you ask your Education Secretary to make sure that they get a break this summer from initiatives from his department, which have very often been contradictory and had to respond fast-moving pandemic, of course, but they long for a period of stability and predictability. I mean, can you have a word with him and see if he can provide them with a little respite?
I will do everything I can to
Thank you.
I totally understand that point, and all I would plead in mitigation and forgiveness from our wonderful teachers is it has been difficult to work out how to keep some things going, how to do examinations, and but your point is well made.
Thank you. Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you. And could I also add the challenge that many teachers face currently, which is that they are off school with COVID, and that is causing huge difficulty for schools and obviously compounding the issues of catch-up. And I absolutely echo what the Select Committee Chair has said and wanted to ask you about that as well on behalf of petitioners, because the Education Policy Institute calculated that education catch-up spending per head in England is around 19% of what the US is spending and 12% of what the Netherlands is spending. How do you explain that?
Well, I don't recognise those figures, and I don't agree with them because they failed to take. They failed to take account of the 14 billion that we invested in education as soon as I became Prime Minister, 14.4 billion, which took funding for every primary school pupil up to £4,000 a head, funding for every secondary school pupil up to £5,000 a head. So we began with massive investments, and we've added another 3 billion, and there will be more to come.
So, yes, the overall spending on catch-up for English pupils is £310 per head, and in the US it's £1,600 per head, and in the Netherlands it's £2,500 per head. We know the impact of this pandemic has been enormous on children and young people. Why is it that the Prime Minister feels we don't need to invest in helping them catch up and make the best of going forward in the future?
Well, that's obviously not how I see it. We're making a thick end of £20 billion investment already, and there will be more to come.
So, moving on to the impact of current COVID numbers and also the potential impact when the restrictions are released on the 19th of July. I know you said on many occasions you don't actually have the data, which is quite concerning because the impacts on current COVID levels, particularly in regions like the North East, where we're seeing a surge, we're already seeing businesses unable to function, hospitality businesses having to close. If I take nurseries, for example, they have to maintain legal ratios of staff to children in order to stay open, and the early years sector has a very young workforce, many of whom are not double vaccinated. So cases are skyrocketing and nurseries are being put in a position of having to turn families away in order to maintain legal ratios. Which families do you think they should be prioritising? Well,
I thank them for all that they're doing and for the difficulties that they're going through. As I was saying to Greg earlier on, we have to make sure that we use the tools we have to in the form of isolation to get through this particular phase. It won't last long. You talk about businesses or hospitality sector businesses closing. Actually, thanks to the vaccine rollout, we were able to get through to step 3, and now it looks as though, we'll take the final decision on July the 12th, but it looks as though we'll get through to step 4, which will allow them to open up fully without the need for the 1 metre rule, and that will, that's the most positive thing that can happen.
But that's all in theory, Prime Minister, because the reality is that businesses are facing huge staffing issues, with many having to isolate and therefore not able to function as businesses. It's in the hospitality industry, it's in many other industries, but particularly in those industries where a lot of young people are employed. So does the Prime Minister have the data for the relaxations he's proposing and how those businesses are going to be affected over the next 2 to 3 months, given we're already seeing the impact of high COVID levels in areas like the North East?
Yes, I mean, if I may respectfully say, I don't think it's possible to argue simultaneously that businesses need to be able to be more open and at the same time to oppose the relaxations. It's not quite clear to me.
I'm asking the Prime Minister,
I had a bit of this earlier on.
That's not the argument I'm making.
I mean, you can't have it both ways. You're either in favour of opening up and the rest of things.
I'm asking for the data. I'm asking whether you've seen the data.
And I've already been very clear that we have data about hospitalizations and deaths. We have data about predictions for where they might go, but then they're available under the SPI-MO charts. You can look at them, but they're speculative at the moment. We're tracking in about the middle of the projections that SPI-M made for the third wave, if we went ahead with all the openings. So we're the middle to low end of the projections that they made, if you look at the graphs.
So the current crisis has put many new parents, particularly mothers, at risk of redundancy. So 2 years ago, the government announced it would extend redundancy protection for new mothers returning to work to 6 months. That was 2 years ago. When is this going to happen?
We want to help new mothers to return to work, but we want to help everybody to get back into work. When
is the redundancy protection going to happen that's been promised?
I can't give you the answer to that particular payment, but what I can certainly tell you is that at the moment the problem is, as I said earlier on, the problem is not so much a shortage of jobs or a lack of vacancies. The problem is a shortage of labour, and that is what we need to fix.
That doesn't stop women returning from maternity leave being made redundant.
No, and I don't want to see that happen.
1 in 9, are currently awaiting government legislation.
Can you let us know when you're going to bring that in?
Well, we'll do everything. Of course, I will let you know about that. But our intention is to help everybody coming back from maternity leave to get into work or back into work as fast as possible.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Bernard. Prime Minister, can you tell me what specific initiatives ministers are bringing forward to build back in a more feminine and gender-neutral way?
Caroline, we are doing everything that we can to ensure that we have a recovery that is, as I was saying just now to Ms McKinnell, that gets our women back into the workforce. I know that they've had particular problems, making sure that we get everybody back to work in a way that is, as I say, fair across both sexes. Actually, if you look at what's happened with furlough, I think according to the Resolution Foundation, 52% of furlough has generally attracted more female recipients than male so far, which I think is positive. And
it's evidence, Prime Minister, that women were more likely to be in sectors that were shut down longer. What level of female employment do you regard as evidence that we have built back in a more feminine way?
Well, Karen, we want to make sure that we have female employment rising across the board. We want to have employment rising across the board. And just to quote what the Resolution Foundation said, they said that the economic impact of COVID-19 has been surprisingly equal for men and women. That doesn't mean that there aren't specific problems like the one that's just been referred to on returning from maternity leave that we must address, and we will.
But your own ministers won't publish economic impact assessments on furlough, so we don't know from the government's own figures what the impact has been across different genders.
Well, I'm quoting from the Resolution Foundation report.
But how about quoting from the economic impact assessments of your own ministers and the Government Equalities Office?
Well, as you know, Caroline, all policies must, under the Public Sector Equality Duty in the Equality Act, be scrutinised for their impact on different groups. But the information I have is that the gender pay gap is at a record low. We have 1.9 million more women in work than there were in 2010, and women, for instance, on FTSE 350 boards is up around 50%. 50%. There's a 50% increase in women on FTSE 350 boards in just 5 years, which I think is quite fast going. And those, I think, are pretty useful metrics, Caroline.
And should policies for recovery be in the round, or should they be targeted at those who were most impacted by COVID?
We want to have a recovery that looks after everybody in society. Everyone, everywhere, and if I think back to 28 and that crisis. I think that when we came out of it, I'm not certain that we did deal with people's sense of injustice and inequality. We have a huge job to do now as a government, as a Conservative government, to level up and unite across the whole country. And that is what we're going to do.
You can't point at a single policy or initiative that is going to help you build back in a more feminine and gender neutral way. Just one.
Well, I've mentioned the results. I've mentioned already what we've done by reducing the gender pay gap, Caroline, to an all-time low. If you look at, let's just give you an example. Look at the Foreign Office, for instance. We now have female, which is leading. If you want to look at a more feminine approach to tackling climate change, it is our diplomats around the world in Washington, in New York, in Beijing. They're female, Caroline, and so many, and they are the people. They are the people at the tip of. They are the people at the tip of the UK mission to build back better for the world. 40. I think if you look at our climate change negotiators, Caroline, half of them are female, and they're doing a fantastic job, as I was saying earlier on. They have succeeded in building back better for Britain and the world by getting 70% of the world's economy to commit to getting to net zero by 2050. That's a fantastic achievement by British women.
Thank you. But you didn't get the financial pledges from the G7 for the.
I think I'm getting the feeling that you would find fault with almost anything that we did, Caroline, with the greatest possible respect to you. And we did get the 100 billion, and I think that we will surprise you on the upside. And British women in COP and represented in this government, as they are abundantly, will surprise you on the upside by what they achieved to build back better in a more feminine way. And if you can think of a way of saying build back more feminine in a pithier way, then send me a postcard.
Well, our sole role is to find fault so that you can make things even better, Prime Minister. Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, you talk about building back better and levelling up. What's your message to people who are living in seriously overcrowded accommodation, who, since the time you've been Mayor and Prime Minister, have seen toddlers grow into teenagers in that accommodation, who are working but can't afford the private rents and can't afford to buy? Your government has fuelled house purchases, but what support are you going to give to those people who need better housing?
Well, don't forget that this government, well, first of all, you mentioned my time as Mayor. And I'm glad you do, because it gives me the opportunity.
80% private rents was your definition of affordable.
Gives me the opportunity to point out the paucity of the current Labour mayors.
No, Prime Minister, I'm actually asking about what you're doing as Prime Minister. Can I mentioned it doesn't mean that. But Prime Minister, well, if you want to talk about your record as Mayor, Prime Minister, that was when you defined affordable housing. Can I just speak? If you could let me finish. Yeah, you defined affordable housing as 80% of local private rents. Do you know what private rents are in Central and in London?
This is the government that actually just increased local housing allowance again, don't forget, in order to tackle precisely that.
That doesn't tackle the overcrowding, Prime Minister.
And
the supply.
When you talk about supply, and if I can talk about the record of the previous Mayor of London and the current Mayor of London, that's banned apparently, but it's a relevant consideration. I built far more.
You're
homes.
The big boss now, Prime Minister.
Far more homes than needed. But now across the UK, we had this last year a record number of housing starts, and never let it be forgotten that the Conservatives, I think, in
Prime Minister,
year,
my point is,
Prime Minister,
your own government
built more council homes than Labour did in 13 years.
Your government cannot even tell us how many social housing units have been built. You're fuelling the supply, but for purchase, which is fine for those who can purchase, but for many people, particularly in expensive parts of the country, like my constituency, cannot purchase and cannot rent at
Don't
private
forget,
lenders.
Meg, that we built more council homes in 1 year than your Labour Party, your Labour government did in 13 years. Okay, so I won't take any lessons about building social homes. And I built
But it's
more
not
in,
enough, is it,
and I
Prime
built
Minister?
more in
It's not
London than the current mayor has done or will do. And we will, and by the way, I disagree with you respectfully about people's ambitions for home ownership. I do think social housing is of massive importance. We must build more social housing. That's totally right. But I think ultimately lots of people in this country, in their 20s, 30s, 40s,
Prime Minister,
should
you're
have
playing
the chance
games with my
of
words.
home
I have
ownership.
nothing against home ownership, but
Well,
many people
you could have
simply
fooled me.
can't
You could have-
afford
you could have
it.
fooled me.
Many people simply can't afford it.
You've made your point, Meg. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I prefer respectfully as part of the discourse. Can we move on to post-Brexit impact, and we go to the Chair of the Scottish Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
And thank you, Sir Bernard, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. Since Brexit's happened, there seems to be a whole lot of activity around what's referred to as strengthening the Union. What if it becomes clear that Scotland doesn't want the Union strengthened?
I'm not at all sure that that's true, Pete, and you and I have had many exchanges on this in the past. But I think that there was a vote in 2014. I think it was pretty clear what the people of Scotland wanted. It was decisive, and in terms of the union, Pete, just look at it. In a dispassionate way, the strength of our common institutions was really palpable during that pandemic.
Well, what I'm looking at is
still is
an election that was held less than 2 months ago, and as you know, Prime Minister, what was elected was a majority of MSPs who favour independence for a nation. So, I mean, that would indicate to me that there doesn't seem to be such an appetite for a strengthening of the union. In fact, quite the opposite. So, would you just do this Scotland anyway, regardless of what our democratic institutions say about this?
Would I do what?
Strengthen the union, do whatever that is supposed to be. Would you do it just like you imposed the Internal Market Act upon Scotland, just like you decided that Scotland would be taken out of the European Union, even though it was rejected by the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland? Is it just something you'd do to us? Is this how you're going to approach Scotland, the Scottish Government now? Just do things to us?
No, I don't think it can be bad for all the constituent parts of the union to have their trading relations strengthened, to have their friendship strengthened, to have their means of easy communication strengthened, their routes from one part of the union to another strengthened. It seems to me to be a good thing and something that's pretty hard to argue against.
Well, it's just that your former senior advisor, rather uncharitably, said you were an unthinking unionist who thinks devolution was a disaster, who would like to reverse it but won't dare try. That's pretty accurate, isn't it? Would you reverse devolution if you had the chance?
No.
What do you really feel about devolution?
Pete, I was a massive beneficiary of devolution. Dave, as I was just saying to Meg Hillier, it was the Labour government's decision to in the late 90s to follow the John Smith package and to devolve that enabled me to become Mayor of London and I think it was a great thing. Now, what you didn't find when I was Mayor of London, you didn't find me endlessly attacking central government and moaning about it, and you didn't find me endlessly trying to shuffle off blame and responsibility onto central government. I took responsibility for things. I took responsibility. If I may say, I think the problem is not with devolution. The problem is with the party in power.
This disaster seems to crop up quite a bit because the one you have admitted to and you conceded to is that when you were speaking to Northern Tory MPs, you said that devolution was Tony Blair's biggest mistake, and again you referred to it as a disaster. You did say that, didn't you?
I certainly think that there are disastrous aspects of Scottish government, Scottish national.
But you weren't
Scottish National Party's
performance. You were referring to devolution.
Scottish National Party's performance in delivering education, in fighting crime, in tackling the scourge of drugs. I think there have been lamentable failures. Yes, I do. Now, the difficult thing for me as Prime Minister of the UK is it's a difficult thing, because I love the whole UK and I want it all to succeed. It's very hard to mount the ramparts and say that something is going wrong in Scotland. I don't want to do that. I want Scotland to be brilliantly governed, and it should be. But I just think that the SNP is not delivering as what it could.
We won't start to continue government, but you're now the Minister for the Union. Could you maybe list your top 3 achievements since you gave